Welcome, everyone. Before anything else, it is just such a pleasure to have a person whose career I've watched for many years and who has led for the city of Tirana, now the country of Albania, in such a remarkable way. So please join me in a round of applause to welcome the Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, so thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you whether you're here in the room or whether you're joining us on live stream. And please feel free to follow along with the conversation using the hashtag Balkans Forward, which also underscores our whole view, hashtag Balkans Forward. We find ourselves at an inflection point, one might say, for Albania and the entire Balkans and Balkans region. Just this morning, the European Commission presented its new proposal for reforming the methodology behind EU accession negotiations. After the disappointing decision from the European Council in October of last year not to open up accession talks for Albania and North Macedonia, this is, in our view, a welcome demonstration of the EU's commitment to the Western Balkans as part of the Euro-Atlantic family. The Commission has stated unequivocally that the, quote, prospect of full EU membership for the Western Balkans remains more than ever a geostrategic investment in a stable and strong and united Europe. Let me repeat that, a geostrategic investment in a stable, strong, united Europe. This morning's proposal from the Commission is meant to improve the effectiveness of the accession process and its implementation for current and future EU accession candidates. I want to quote from The Guardian in a piece from last summer from the Prime Minister, where he talks about joining the EU being about, quote, finally having the possibility to place ourselves in a safe zone from the curse of history. He speaks about, quote, we were the North Korea of Europe. We were isolated from the West, isolated from the East. We had the cruelest communist regime, and that's why we're now so pro-American, pro-NATO, pro-EU. And 95%, this is from me, of the population have said in a survey last year that they believed EU membership would benefit the country. I'm not sure in any country of the European Union you would get those. In fact, I know you would not get those sorts of numbers. As close friends of Albania and the Western Balkans, we at the Council are pleased to hear the EU shares our commitment to the region's continued forward momentum on the path to Euro-Atlantic integration. Our work seeks to reinvigorate U.S. engagement in the region, promote more effective U.S.-European leadership, foster dialogue among key actors across the region, and cultivate a new generation of decision makers and experts that know the Balkans. We aren't a think tank. Thinking is just far too passive for us. We're an action tank, and this is a very important action for us. It takes several forms, including our Balkans Forward Congressional Fellowship, a nonpartisan fellowship program that aims to develop the expertise and build the networks of congressional staff members on Balkans-related issues. Last May, our congressional fellows took a staff delegation trip through the Western Balkans, which included a day of meetings with civil society leaders, regional experts, and high-level government representatives in Tirana, including you, Mr. Prime Minister, and I know they thoroughly engaged the meeting by all accounts. I don't know whether they used the basketball hoop that's outside your workspace, but I'll come to that in my last couple of sentences. We're also working with our partners in the region through strategy sessions and retreats to strengthen their own capabilities for advancing domestic reforms and taking their rightful place as allies in the Euro-Atlantic community. The latest such example was our inaugural ORID dialogue in North Macedonia last October. Coming at a difficult time right after the EU decision, it was crucial to signal to Skopje that your friends are still with you and to encourage them to push ahead on the path of reform and westward integration, even in the face of setbacks. So we did that in Skopje. We look forward to even greater engagement with the Western Balkans, more meetings, more delegation trips, more conversations just like this one in 2020 and beyond. The next few months and years will be complicated for the region, but they're also full of opportunities. Mr. Prime Minister, you're the exact type of partner we wish to have as we work together, the United States, Albania, other countries in the Western Balkans, to solidify your place in the transatlantic community. This is a time for nimble and creative thinking, which you have in great surplus. You have served in your current role since 2013, and you bring to the table the creative eye of an artist and the strategic mindset of a professional basketball player. Now, the artist, we got to know each other first in a young leaders meeting, that dates us a little bit, many years ago on Lake Como. And I think we were all moved at that time by this young mayor in Toronto that was written about in 2005 by Jane Kramer in the New Yorker. And many of you know this piece, but if you don't, look it up. Because it says, Edi Rama is the mayor of Tirana, Albania. It's safe to say the Balkans have never produced a politician so beguiling. So now it may be a prime minister so beguiling. And I think as an artist, you have as good a chance as anyone to paint the future of Albania inside the European Union. Mr. Prime Minister, we're thrilled to have you back at the Council. We look forward to hearing your perspective. And then at this point, I'm going to turn this over to our remarkable Executive Vice President for Programs and Strategy, Damon Wilson, who, if anyone has the vision to drive this sort of thing forward, it is Damon. And then he'll discuss with you, Mr. Prime Minister, Albania's relationship with the EU, opportunities for greater transatlantic engagement with NATO and OSCE, and your domestic and foreign policy priorities for 2020. Mr. Prime Minister, Damon.
Thank you very much, Fred, for that introduction. And Mr. Prime Minister, welcome. Welcome back to the Atlantic Council stage. We're delighted to have you here. And let me just tip my hat to say thank you to the Ambassador, Fleta Faber, who's been a great partner of ours at the Atlantic Council. As Fred said, if you're following along here or particularly online on our TV audience, please join the conversation using the hashtag BalkansForward. Fred mentioned this, the depth of support of Albanians for the relationship with the United States. And it's pretty remarkable. Politics in Albania are as divisive as you might see politics in Washington right now. And yet, the one thing that all Albanians agree dramatically on is the alliance with the United States. Your country has been a remarkable ally across the political spectrum in your country. And so let me start with that. You're here in Washington. You've just met, you're here at a critical time, as Fred outlined, and uncertainty about the EU process. But you've met with Secretary Pompeo, you've been at the White House with the National Security Advisor, you've met with the head of the World Bank, the head of USAID. Give us a sense of what your priorities are for this visit and the relationship right now, sir.
First of all, to set the record straight, Washington has surpassed us in divisiveness.
We'll come back.
We are not alone anymore in that. But yes, it was a very intense day of meetings, and being here as Prime Minister is an honor and it's absolutely a pleasure. And concluding the whole day by being hosted in this place adds to the honor and the pleasure. So thank you for that. I would say that in this precise moment in time, we have not only a lot to exchange in terms of our bilateral relations, but also in terms of very common challenges, one of them being Iran. And you know very well that we have an issue with this country and its regime, and of course, in the same time, we're very aware of the fact that while we have taken a certain risk entering in a common operation of the United States, to save people from the threat of their lives. In the same time, it is very comforting that we are not alone in that. And of course,
you're referring to Albania's hosting of members of the MEK who have been resettled in Albania, as well as some foreign fighters. Perhaps Ambassador Dan Fried had something to do with this too.
yes, true. Yeah, Washington has to do with this for sure. But it's not only this, but also the region. And we know very well that today the Western Balkans are a better place, first and foremost thanks to the United States and its allies, and the incredible transformation of our area from an area of hostilities and long chapters of conflict and bloodshed in an area of peace and cooperation. But of course, we are not yet where we can and we should be, because there are still issues and there are still problems to solve, and we count very much on the help of the American friends. And as a nation, as an Albanian nation, as people living not only in Albania but in all the countries of the Western Balkans, we are absolutely in a better place. And if one would try to go back in last 30 years and imagine how our course of history could be without the United States, it's impossible. It's impossible to imagine that we could be where we are today.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, the last time you were on our stage here in 2016, things looked a little bit different. There's a lot of concern today, uncertainty with the EU, some of the political challenges in the region. But when you were here a few years ago, the outlook for the region was very different. Skopje and Athens were at an intractable impasse. There was no real movement in a conversation between Pristina and Belgrade. Montenegro was not in NATO, and you were years away from a conversation about opening conversations with the EU. So there's a lot of concern about the moment we're in today, but with a little bit of perspective, when you were last on our stage, you can see some progress. As you, as Prime Minister, look out across your country and the region, what do you see as the biggest trends, and are they going in the right way or the wrong way? Because there's a level of concern here, but with some perspective, you see the progress made. How do you view it from your seat?
First of all, it looks like still we have to deal with a certain curse that has characterized our life, because when EU was in a very good shape, we were the very bad guys. Now that we are okay guys, maybe not very good guys, they are in a terrible shape. So we have to wait for the moment when we are good guys, but they also are in a good shape. And it doesn't seem to be the moment. Anyhow, there is some progress, and there is some good progress made because of this so-called new methodology. France brought up certain issues, I think, with some very good points, because even we may have had it easier without them, without these points. It's really very good that there is a discussion on improving the methodology and of making it fairer and more predictable for everyone, because it was becoming more and more of a nightmare and more schizophrenic between the Commission that always followed by letter the homework that had to be made by the countries, and the Council that more and more started to be hostages of political agendas and of inner dynamics in different countries. So, although now they are not anymore 28, they are 27, they are still a lot to get in one decision. In the same time, for us, Albania, you mentioned, with a certain suspicious smile that we are maybe, we are by far the only country in Europe to have 95% of desire to be part of European Union. And your smile was a bit like, what's the problem with you guys? But, and in times when, Brits left, so, but for the Albanians, Europe is much more than what it is for other countries, because we have had a difficult life by being kept hostage of empires that we didn't choose. And this is the first, not really an empire, but the first place that we wanted to be since long time, and being there is like escaping forever the curse of history and being forever saved somewhere where we can decide for ourselves. This is the ideal vision. Of course, it's a bit like the marriage. You need to get married to then understand that it's not the same that what you thought about. But still, the fact that people divorce doesn't make you give up when you want to get married, okay?
So despite the divisions between EU members themselves about the future of the Union, despite Brexit, you still see for Albania the EU accession process as a pathway out of this curse for history?
Not only for Albania, but for the whole Western Balkans. This is the only way, and there is no alternative. Because as I said, we have never been able to choose. Now we are going, since 3 decades, in a fight to make our choice become reality. And for the simple reason that there is not another place in our continent where we can and we should be, and in the same time feel free and feel, like living in a decent society and in a functioning state of democracy, of course.
So many of your compatriots last fall were, dare I say, angry at the decision of President Macron that really punted on opening accession talks. And yet you went public pretty quickly to say that President Macron's ideas were a breath of fresh air, if I can quote you on that. And you acknowledged that you thought they were geopolitically wrong. But what did you mean by a breath of fresh air, and how are your conversations with the French, with Paris, through this process now?
It's true that before the physical earthquake, we had this psychological earthquake. So the decision of non-taking a decision to get us starting the accession talks was perceived very, very badly. Because first of all, we deserve it, and we did everything that a country like us had to do to open accession talks. Secondly, no one country before, and I'm talking facts, I'm not giving opinion, no one country before opening accession talks from the countries that today are in talks or within EU did not as much as we have done to open accession talks. Not because we are better than any of them, but because the process became more and more demanding, and the demands from the next country in a row became more and more peculiar, let's say. So, of course, we have all the problems that are, that are talked about. Of course, we have problems with crime. Of course, we have problems with corruption. Of course, we have problems with having more transparent and more well-performing institutions, and so on. But if we would not have had these problems, we would have asked to become members today. So these are problems that today are less than they were some years ago, and to fight to solve them to the extent that member states have solved them, we need the accession talks. It's not like, just pretending to have a gift or a present, but it's pretending to get the know-how transfer on how to move on through a roadmap that is very well consolidated, and it helps us to build all the mechanisms of a functioning member state of EU. I give you an example, the justice reform. We have heard about justice reforms many times in the 30 years, but we never had the justice reform. The justice reform that we are making now, it's a real one, and it has been possible, and it's possible only because of the strong support of your country here, United States, and of the support and the know-how of the European Union. So the European Union is not only a very strong incentive in our imagination and in our fueling of the efforts, but it's also a know-how base. And
I want to come back to some of the reform issues.
yeah, but in the same time, what I always said to conclude about the French, I always said, listen, it's not about us. And as a matter of fact, what is happening in these days make it very clear. It's not about us, it's about them. It's about them deciding all together what they want for themselves, the EU, and for the enlargement process. Of course, they have a certain level of hypocrisy, because it would have been much more natural, much more fair, much more acceptable to say, listen, you have done your homework, but we are not ready to start talking about this now because we have some problems to solve. And in that, I have to say, the French president has been the most straightforward. So, because it's easy always to find ways and reasons to say to a country like Albania or North Macedonia or all the countries in the region, no, you are not ready yet because, you have some bad guys here, you have some bad practices here, which of course are true. But we are not talking about becoming members, we are talking about opening the accession talks. And for opening the accession talks, we are given in paper, by written, what we should do, and the Commission has certified that we have done it. Now, I don't think that they have in Paris or in Berlin or in Hague or wherever in Europe anyone employed 24 hours 7 to follow Albania. The Commission has. So has people that deal with Albania all the time. And they talk about facts. They talk about what is written in the papers. The others talk about what may be written in the newspapers. And so this makes a difference. And we have to live with it, and it's fine,
So Fred mentioned the Commission paper that's come out today. Do you see a roadmap that will allow for the process to recommence either at the Zagreb summit in May under the Croatian presidency or even before that, or are you in a historic pause for a while?
Don't ask me that. I will never ever anymore say that this may happen in this station or in this station. I've said it enough. I've been disappointed enough, and I don't want anymore to say when this may happen, because with all these guys you don't know. It's not one person or one organization. It's 27 heads of states that have 27 type of elections, 27 type of problems. You never know what will happen to someone, and then you may go say, no, we are not ready for this guy. So, but of course the process is on the right track, and what is the most important is that we are continuing to do our work same as we would do if accession talks would have been open. So Albania in itself is not losing time, is not sitting and crying, is not waiting for some miracles to happen. And maybe the nice thing of it will be that it will happen while we are not expecting it anymore to happen. So in the near future.
So you mentioned the difference between the perception and reality of what Albania is today. If you listen to the debate play out in the French Parliament, in the Dutch Parliament, the Danish Parliament, even in the Bundestag, lots of concerns about crime, corruption, rule of law issues. And you mentioned the extraordinary judicial reform you're going through. But you also have just started a big offensive on some of these crime and corruption issues. So what's your view of the reality of these sets of concerns that you can hear from parliaments across Europe about the issue of crime and corruption? What are you doing about it?
You know, when they speak in their parliaments about us, they don't have in mind us, they have in mind their voters. And not only that, but many of them have in mind not what information their voters should be given, but what their voters want to hear. And I had an experience with a member of parliament who was rapporteur on Albania. I'm not mentioning the country, but everyone can guess. Who says to me, "How you think, Mr. Prime Minister, the Sharia law will coexist with the EU acquis?" I said to him, "Are you looking forward to open accession talks with Saudis or with someone in Middle East?" No. You have the Sharia law, right? You are a Muslim country. No, sir, we don't have the Sharia law. We never had it, and I don't know why you were. And although I told him everything about it, he wrote an op-ed after the visit in Albania about the Sharia law as an impediment to open accession talks with Albania. And this guy, a rapporteur, not someone, you know. So there are a lot of these things that makes it difficult for governments, for prime ministers, for ministers of foreign affairs that need the votes of these guys, need to have majorities, need to go on in their own country, need to deal with voters, with elections. So it's not the best time in Europe, it's not the best time within the European Union, but I very much hope that with the new Commission and the fresh air coming has something which makes it more geopolitical and more political, although it can make it even more difficult than it is now in the process. Mm-hmm. But for us, the important is to start, because the know-how and the roadmap and the next steps are more important than the arrival. So the journey is much more beneficial to the country than the date of arrival. So without this journey, our countries cannot really stand for a long time in the right path.
Let me broaden and ask a question about, we've talked about American politics, and there's no secret that across Western democracies, something's happening, and there's a bit of a populist backlash. We're churning through this in Europe and the United States. But 2019 began with quite a few anti-government protests in Serbia, in Montenegro, in Albania. We saw in each of these countries across the region a failure to reach sort of accommodation agreement between governments and opposition, boycotts of parliament, boycotts of elections, and you've had this problem with the Democratic Party of Albania. What's happening to the state of democracy in the Western Balkans and Albania? How do you have democracies and institutions function when you've got the oppositions opting out?
Listen, we have talked a lot during all these decades about how much harm communism made to our countries. And it has always been about what happened in the past. But there is a lot happening in the present that has to do with that past. And one of the most harmful points is that we grew in a society where the other did not exist, where the opponent did not exist. There were only us and them, the enemy. Right. So the culture of contradicting the other without necessarily being killed was not built. And so the whole process of entering in a normal democracy, I would say, is a process of understanding that at the end the quality of the democratic life, as the quality of living in a family, does not depend on how much you agree with each other, but on the way you disagree with each other. So if you disagree in a gracious way, life is good. If you disagree in a crazy way, life is bad. So in that sense, we are still, growing bodies. We are not yet there. So it needs time and it needs experience to get there. And I don't see it necessarily as a problem, but I see it as a natural shortcoming in the process of growing up. Mm-hmm. And frankly, yes, I think we went through a very difficult moment because boycotts became a tradition in the Balkan, and so every one of us made boycotts. It became natural, it became normal. I hope it will not be the case in US in some years, but we never had the boycott of elections, and so this was new, and this had to be refused, and this couldn't be matter of negotiation. I can say that very, very, very improbable to see in the next steps any party doing the same. So I think we are over with boycotts because everyone understood that at the end you don't win. At the end it's more a self-destruction that of course harms also the country, but it doesn't bring you anything. So it's a process of getting more mature. In Montenegro is a different story because in Montenegro it's not about parties that have the same agenda as we have, because we don't have any party that is anti-NATO, anti-EU, anti-free market, anti-anything. We had the most brutal communist dictatorship, and we are the only country in the former Eastern Europe that never had a communist party. So there is a communist party, 0. whatever percent, like the rivals of your president in Iowa, and so it's in Montenegro is different. Right. They have opposition towards the NATO integration. They have opposition towards very major strategic goals.
I want to bring up some of the strategic issues, but first, still on the regional issue. Despite some of those divisions that cut across the region, we have seen you with President Vučić, with Prime Minister Zaev. I think you've now met 3 times to talk about accelerating regional integration, economic cooperation, and mini Schengen. And you've been pretty outspoken when some were concerned, is this an alternative to the EU membership or something? And you've said this is not a new Yugoslavia. It's not a Serbian plan for economic conquest of the region. It's a historic necessity. So what do you mean by that, and where do you see this going, the move between the three of you?
In this moment, I am the perfect traitor, at least in the imaginary of people that do not understand that you cannot build peace and prosperity with the same instruments and weapons you fought for freedom. It's impossible. So what we are trying to do, and what I think we should and continue to do, and we had today conversations about it, and yesterday with in the White House, and today with the Secretary of State about how important it is to push this regional Schengen, I don't know why they call mini Schengen. By definition, I can't like anything mini because I'm maxi in terms of. But it's a regional Schengen, so-called, to underline that it's a project of implementing in our region the four freedom of EU. So freedom of movement of people, freedom of movement of goods, freedom of movement of capitals and services. So I give you just one number, and it's not my number, it's number of World Bank study in support of the Berlin process. The time of waiting in the borders of the Balkans of people and goods within a year is more than 1,000 years. So what the hell you have to think? What the hell you have to think? How one cannot and should not understand that cutting this time, letting goods move faster, letting people move faster, it's good for everyone. Secondly, interestingly enough, Ambassador Granell pushed for a decision to reinstall the flights between Pristina and Belgrade. Everyone in Pristina applauded. I applauded too. If I would have said it, not done it, maybe I would not have been here today, I would have been beheaded. So it's also a lot of mindset that need to change. So we need to understand that this is not an alternative to the European Union. This is just doing among each other something that we can't do yet with the European Union countries. This is also, in the same time, preparing to be good EU members. And I saw something interesting in the new methodology, which is not till now in the process of integration, which has to do with neighborhoods, with regional cooperation, with, let's say, neighborly behavior. So this is very important. We can't go anywhere if we stay isolated in our little markets, and if we continue to see each other as, what happened in the past. Of course, this will not at all be a substitute or an underminer of the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade, which has to go on. And this has nothing to do with my opinion and my position on that, because since day one and all the way, I say that Serbia should recognize Kosovo as soon as possible. It's for Serbia, it's a nightmare that Serbia should get rid of. And Kosovo is a reality that cannot be changed. But at the same time, we need to work together. We need to find out what and where we can work together. Of course, in that we don't agree, but it's not a reason to freeze everything and to turn the back to each other, because it doesn't help anyone. So, you have a conflict, big conflict today in Ukraine, and the president of Ukraine sits with the president of Russia, and they talk how to make steps to go further. So they are in war there, so in this zone. So how one can avoid to talk?
I think it's an important message. You're here in Washington the week that Kosovo got a new government in place. Albin Kurti became your counterpart, prime minister in Kosovo. And some have been nervous that Vojvodina, his party of self-determination in the past, has spoken about the desire to join with Albania. How do you see this new government in Kosovo managing these issues, being able to manage the dialogue with Belgrade?
But poetry of opposition is not the same than prose of government, so
That's a
it's
great
not
line.
this the point. The point is that it's good that they have a new government, and first of all, I look forward to start working with them on our relation. And there is one topic that has always been my dream and the dream of every Albanian from Albania and from Kosovo: the border to become just totally fluid. Why this was not possible? Because immediately, anytime we would mention it, not in Belgrade, but here in Washington and in Brussels, people would say, "Are you crazy? This is Greater Albania." And also in Belgrade, of course, they would say. Now we have this agreement that borders can be totally open. So there are some people saying, but do you think we have to ask Serbs about our own border? What is this? You know, this is to just mock people, to take people, to fool people, because yes, you need a common agreement, and then you can do it with everyone. So after having convinced, the funny and sad thing is, after having convinced Serbs and the president of Serbia to give up on the movement of people, because they wanted only goods and capitals and services, not people, because for them was an obsession. If we accept the free movement of people, then Albanians will open their border and will be the Greater Albania, which is not true. Will be 2 states, as will be 6 states in the Western Balkans, but we'll have normal communication like in the European Union. So this will make Albanians move among each other totally free. So this is something I think we can sort out with, because when you are in government, it's very much different. So now we can work together, and I hope sooner more than later we'll also clarify all these distortions about this regional Schengen, and we can move forward with our own borders. So and there is also something else. It's not a little EU in the sense that the 6 should have consensus and everyone should do the same thing. No, there is no veto, there is no prejudice, there is no conditionality. So everyone can do parts of it as it pleases. So it's not that if we will do it with Kosovo and Kosovo will ask, Kosovo has to do the same with Serbia now. No. So everyone, Montenegro is part of the initiative, and they say we like mostly of it. There are some things we are not interested, but exactly because it's so flexible, they don't need to do everything in the same pace. So it's very good.
Mr. Prime Minister, I want to open up the conversation to some questions from the team that we have here. Catch my eye. I'd love to put on the spot or welcome some of our Atlantic Council board directors as well and team members. But let me take a couple of questions for you that you can parse. We'll start here, and I'll throw another one in, but please catch my attention. Please introduce yourself, and please ask a question rather than a statement.
Okay. Keita Kostrece, Voice of America, Albanian Service. Should I just do it only in English, or what do you prefer, Prime Minister?
It's helpful if you don't. It's helpful if you don't mind doing it in English.
It's up to you. I don't see why you should do it in Albanian, or to say that the Albanian Prime Minister didn't talk Albanian in America. So it's
okay.
Please, just quickly.
It will be another fault of mine.
Okay. I'll just jump in. Lately, there has been a normative act in Albania. It was a serious act from the Albanian government to fight corruption and organized crime, and it has started its work, and it has been commended. I wanted to ask, since you've been in government for 6 years, and this issue clearly is so important that you have to take this normative act, do you feel some sort of responsibility about why it has not been done before? And just to follow up, you've been very strong lately with this act and other actions towards against crime and corruption, but in the past towards people in your own party that have been accused of links to organized crime, you have been slow to respond, or you haven't actually.
Yes.
Let me pick up Milan, please. I'm delighted to have a board
Mr.
director.
Prime Minister, I wanted to ask you a question about the role of the chairmanship which Albania holds in the OSCE, and particularly with respect to Ukraine, because as you acknowledged in your opening speech at the opening session for the Albanian chairmanship, you mentioned how it is probably the most important issue that the OSCE confronts. You made a trip to Ukraine as your first act as OSCE chair. The OSCE plays a very vital role with the special monitoring mission as well as the trilateral group. And I wonder, what is your sense, having recently been to Ukraine, about the situation there, the prospects for a genuine ceasefire, and beyond that for a legitimate peace?
Terrific. Thank you for bringing that up, Ambassador Verveer. For those of you who don't know, Albania is holding the OSCE chairman in office role right now. Please, Owen, we'll take these three.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You haven't made much reference to your economic agenda. I'm wondering if you could, in a few moments, summarize your priorities there, particularly your aspirations for closer U.S.-Albanian economic collaboration.
Terrific. Why don't we bring these three back to you, sir?
I didn't make reference to the economic agenda because I wasn't asked, you know. And normally people like to ask about politics, not about economy. So
it was on my list.
Which is good for politicians in general. I would start with the first question. It's a good question. Why not before? And the answer is very simple. How this could have been done before? How, before having the special prosecution, which is born through the painful process of justice reform and vetting, we could dare to go after assets and finance of organized crime? How we could imagine to seize and to then confiscate properties that are made through illegal activities with the courts we had all these years. The courts we had all these years, and we're still having for a large part, are totally contaminated by organized crime. And we have judges and prosecutors that are not simply colluding with organized crime, but are part of organized crime. So we had to wait patiently the moment that we can work in a ground where the police is not humiliated when it brings cases to the prosecutor or to the court. And now we have the new special prosecution office, which is made for it, and we have the special court of serious crimes. And I need to tell you that these cases will be treated in the court by people who have passed vetting. So this makes a big difference. First. Second, we did, with the help and the push of our American friends, a piece of legislation which is the so-called decriminalization law for all people that want to be elected. It's a very thorough screening of their life story, and if they have certain type of conviction, they cannot be elected. Okay. We did the process, and we are continuing, of vetting the judges and prosecutors and telling that whomever from the judges and prosecutors cannot justify his or her own possessions, wealth, it's out of the system and is subject to possible investigations and indictments in the future. What we are doing now is very simple. It's tough, it's you know, bold, but it's simple. All people that have been convicted for drug trafficking, human trafficking, mafia, financing of terrorism, or participating in whatever activity linked to terrorism, and murders and several serious crimes, have to prove that the house, the business, the cars, the land is coming from work, not from illegal activities. It's simple. So police has simply to file based on a closed list, because there is a register of convicted people. We know who they are, everyone knows. So it's a closed list. It cannot be selective, it cannot be cherry picking. It's simply everyone has to respond for that. So the police sends a paper, asks the subject in 48 hours to compile a formula about certain questions, and then is the special prosecution office that has to go through the paper in 15 days. And then to ask the seizure to the special court in 15 days. The properties are seized, and then there is a due process that can continue only not more than 6 months about confiscation or not. This is the process. And same then, second block, for people that have been accused for this kind of crimes, not convicted because of corrupt system. So it's not, again, it's not a trial, it's simply an administrative verification that, sir, you have a certain standard of life, which is amazing. God bless you if this comes from work and has nothing to do with your past criminal activity. But you have to prove it. Not the state, not the police, not the prosecutor. You have to prove it. If you don't prove it, it's over. So there are people asking, but why with them and not with politicians? Because politicians, listen, it's again very simple. It's not the government, it's not me, it's not the police that has to deal with whatever wrongdoing of politicians. It's the justice system. That's why we are reforming justice. Of course, it will need time, of course it will need strength of the institutions, but we are not in 1945. Thanks God. I don't have the power of 1945 to go after all politicians and to say you have done something wrong, or I want to see your... We have an inspectorate for the politicians that evaluate the wealth, and this is the institution so far of evaluation. But if tomorrow politicians are caught in wrongdoing, so they are convicted in, like these people are convicted, these are not people that we doubt or the police doubt that they are criminals. Of course, there are people under investigation in Albania or in the EU or in the US, but they are not in this list. So it's not about doubts, it's about people that have been sent in front of a court of law, convicted or indicted by the prosecutor. And about the party, it's the same. A party is not a place where you make investigations and trials. The party is not a place where you pick who will participate. And the party is never judged on the wrongdoing of some individuals. It's judged on how it reacts. If the party become, let's say, a lawyer to protect and to absolve in front of the public people that have to do with certain things that are not good, then it's a problem. But you can't tell me one single case when we didn't take distance when the justice had to do its job. And sorry to say, we are the only party that has done this. So this is the answer. When it comes to Ukraine, I would say we visited the conflict area, and it's hell on earth. So it's out of my power of explanation. what we saw. So a tiny river separating the two the two zones, the so-called intermediate area of disengagement. On one side, the separatists, or whatever you call them. On the other side, the Ukrainian sovereign state. And they have agreed to build a bridge in the size, I would say width of an ambulance, not larger. Only an ambulance can cross the bridge, and still they don't have yet the agreement that the ambulance can go all over the bridge. And in this bridge, in temperatures that are impossible, with a wind that is killing, there are 10,000 people per day that cross. 90% of them elderly people, because they have to go on the other side to get the pensions. They have to go to take some pharmaceuticals. They have to go to send because the hospital is on the other side. And there are people dying by walking, literally, not literally dying. The ambulance cannot bring a terminal patient till the hospital, so they have to stop in a certain point, and then the patient has to be carried, by doctors, and patients die. So it goes to this point. It's better than it was, I'm told. So my imagination cannot bring me to something worse, but seemingly it's much better than it was, because they were killing each other 24 hours 7. Now there is ceasefire during the day, so at least people can walk and cross. Before they couldn't. During the night, the special monitoring mission cannot stay there, so there are then shootings. We need to invest more in technology and video surveillance, but it's really tough, and it's really something. It would be good to theoretically to bring spoiled young people to see that. It's happening now in our continent, and it's happening in a place that's not far from now was a good one. So, life, sometimes our people tend to make comparison with France, Germany, Italy. Not Italy. So I had someone one day said to me, why you, because I was saying about the earthquake, be patient. Look, Italy, they have 10 years waiting for reconstruction. Why you make this comparison with Italy? Italy is not developed. We should compare with more developed countries. Albania. To just, not America. It was not in America the discussion was in Albania. So, About economy, we got this very strong hit, very severe. The assessment of post-disaster is beyond €1 billion, which for our economy is quite big. But our goal is to reconstruct all, but not cut certain important projects, starting, for example, from services, but also defense budget. We have to keep going. Not explode the deficit and the debt. So we are not going to increase the debt. We are going to just slow a bit down the pace of decreasing the debt. We will extend a bit the deficit. We are waiting for the donors conference on the 17th. Hopefully we'll get some support. I know that it will be far from what the whole volume of money is. But we have some other good things in mind, as President Trump would say, but I'm not going to tell them to you today.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. As Fred said at the beginning, part of the team that's here is our Balkans Forward team that is working on the issues we've talked about of keeping the United States engaged, helping to expand the economic development, particularly in the wake of the devastating earthquake. I think most importantly to support the process of reform in the region so that we can stand by you and your neighbors being firmly anchored in the strategic West. This is unfinished business, and we're proud to be playing a part with that. I want to thank you for coming to the Atlantic Council, for opening yourself to this audience and our audience on TV for this conversation. Please join me in thanking and congratulating the Prime Minister and celebrating the relationship with you.